number? Or is it a mistake?
I think Dunn made a lot of mistakes in 1988 and 1989 that if he had not made those mistakes, they might have been able to avoid the clashes. In 1988, he was in a hurry before he retired to end price controls. And so he allowed a lot of prices to be decontrolled. And that led to such inflation. And people were just beginning to earn a decent living. And there were only over 30% inflation in Beijing. And the reaction was so complete and so fast of the public when he decontrolled prices that that led to severe tension. And in my view, it's part of the explanation why the public in China was able to support the students so completely in the spring of '89. Secondly, this all gets very complicated in the details, but in the spring of '89, on April 15, Hu Yaobang died. He was beloved by liberals. On the 23rd, immediately after the funeral service, the party secretary of China, Zhao Ziyang, went to North Korea. And in his place, Li Peng took over. I see downstairs is a picture of Li Peng meeting one of your leaders. But Li Peng was far more conservative and said we needed to give the students a warning. And so Deng then authorized an editorial that appeared on April 26 that scared the students. And it called what they're moving as turmoil. So it told the students, in effect, that you're going to be in real trouble. You're going to be in danger of being jailed. And that created had just the opposite effect. It was a real mistake of judgment. A third mistake that he made was when he sent in the troops unarmed on May 20th. He did not have enough planning. He did not realize how much reaction there still was. And when they met opposition, they didn't even know what to do. They were just totally unprepared for running in opposition. So I think those three terrible errors, if he had done otherwise, he might have been able to avoid June 4th. However, and you asked me my personal best estimate, if I were a leader of China after May 20th, when peaceful efforts to control the city were no longer possible, it's hard to think of any other way to keep control of the country than the one he did, and calling out the troops and telling them to do what was necessary to keep order.
My name is Yao Xiaobing. I'm from University of Malaya. I have two questions. One is regarding the role of Hua Guofeng in the reform process. I think Professor Frederick Touris recently wrote an article about the reform efforts taken by Hua Guofeng, that implying that if he had not been overthrown by Deng and his allies, he will also carry out the reform of Li in a very different way. So that is how we think about this kind of a revisionist view. The second question is actually you didn't, in your talk, didn't talk much about Deng's relationship with Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang, the other two also very important reformers in the whole process. Okay? And then I think your colleague Roderick McFarquhar in his forward to Zhao Ziyang's journal, the recently published journal of Zhao Ziyang, say that Zhao is actually also should be considered the architect of China's modernization and opening up. So do you want to address more about Deng's relationship with these two very important persons? Thank you.
Hua Guofeng, as you know, was basically in charge from Mao's death in September '76 until December 1978 at the third plenum. As you know, Chinese history generally lauds the victor, and the victor who founded the dynasty is generally considered brilliant, morally correct, and the person who loses in the battle is considered a bad guy, and not to have the wisdom or the moral of the victor. That's, I would say, is a general way of treating history. And I think to some extent, the post-1978 history, as Tiwis and Warrenson argue, has done that to some extent. So to some extent, I agree with their effort to give Wagafum more credit. However, I think they overdo it. And Warrenson, who's a very close friend of mine and worked with me, who supplies the research that Tiwis draws on, and we've had many discussions about this, and my other friends who are familiar with the situation basically agree with me that they have, in trying to correct the dominant view, they've gone a little too far. Because Wagafum clearly did not have the stature, the breadth, the goal. He was not doing enough to bring back earlier officials, and that's why so many officials were so determined in November 1978 to bring them back. The second question of Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang. I think that Deng made very wise choices in choosing those two people to be his supporters in 1980. Deng, in setting up his administration, although he came to power in December 78, it was suddenly he came to power, he didn't have time to shape his own leadership group. It took a little over a year before he shaped his own leadership group. So by early 1980, this group was formed, and the two key people, Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang, I think were excellent choices. Hu Yaobang had been a liberal, a promoter, a leader of the Youth League. He was extremely enthusiastic about reform. He was extremely dedicated. Nobody ever accused him of corruption. He was just totally committed. What many people at high level felt, beginning about 1983, is that Hu Yaobang was not a good manager, and he was not doing a good job of managing daily affairs. And particularly, he was a little too soft sometimes. Now, I think in a country like the United States or Europe, where we have a well-accepted democratic procedure to be soft, you don't have to worry about being overthrown. But in 1986, when the student movement got out of hand, they were really worried that there might be chaos again, as there had been for 150 years. And so it was not just Deng, but other leaders who felt that in January 87, that Hu Yaobang would not be a reliable choice to be the successor, and therefore at that point they turned to Zhao Ziyang. I think Zhao Ziyang was a superb choice in 1980. He had served as party secretary in Guangdong, therefore had much deeper knowledge about Hong Kong and the outside market economy than other provincial leaders. I think you needed a provincial leader to come into Beijing at that time whose mindset was somewhat different than the people who were familiar with it. He was a brilliant person who worked extremely well with the World Bank and with his the bright young economists in China to think about what China needed to do when they carried on economic reform. And there's no question that he led a lot of the details of economic reform after about 1982, when Deng felt Chen Yun was too slow, until about 1989. I think the doubts about Zhao Ziyang became serious in 1988, at the time when they felt that he had been encouraged too much inflation. He'd underestimated the dangers of inflation. And therefore, there was a big conservative reaction to him already in 88, before 1989. And by 1989, when he was not prepared to support the use of martial law, and when he had not been successful in keeping and clearing the square before Gorbachev's visit, it was not just Deng, but a lot of other leaders felt that he had to go. And however, instead, unlike Mao, who destroyed people, Mao allowed those people to remain in organizations, and Zhao Ziyang was put under house arrest. He was not jailed. He was allowed to, play golf and do other things. And so Deng felt at that point you could not get him to provide the leadership that would unite the party after 1989. Any question?
Thank you, Council Chair. Stephen Leong from University Tunku Abdul Rahman. Professor Vogel, indeed, with Nixon as president and Kissinger as Secretary of State, the White House began to think out of the box in its relations with China. What I have found very interesting was that almost at the same time, apart from the big superpower US, small country like Malaysia was doing the same thing, thinking out of the box. From the Wisma Putra, our foreign ministry, and our prime minister, Tun Abdul Razak, with the help of his assistants and so on, it was very clear that the Malaysian Prime Minister was also thinking very differently from earlier Prime Ministers like Tunku Abdul Rahman. Malaysia-China relations were very strained, as you know. But because of ASEAN and the promotion for ZOPFAN, neutrality, and so on, Malaysian foreign policy moved towards neutralism. And if you look at the events, you will see that more or less the same time, Kissinger going to Beijing, here too, quietly negotiations taking place, and so the US and Malaysia voted for Beijing to join United Nations in '71. And after that, improvement of relations. Now, if I may ask this question, you mentioned Hua Guofeng, Zhao Ziyang, and others, but there was no mention about the Gang of Four and how Deng Xiaoping managed to survive their machinations. Could you comment on that? Thank you.
I already talked 1 hour, so I tried to cover a lot. But I suggest that for those who are really interested, you read my whole book. It's about 800 or 900 pages where I go into some of these other details. On the question of thinking out of the box, yes, I agree that Malaysia was also thinking out of the box. And I think it was more than just the United States and Malaysia. In 1969, after the border clash with the Soviet Union, and foreign marshals in China began to give advice that they should begin to think about opening to the West. Within a year or two, other countries like Australia and Italy, Canada, were beginning to move toward normalization of relations, and many other countries were beginning to pick up. So I agree that that was a trend at the time, as China, which had been very close and communist, began to show signs that it was willing to begin to think slowly about opening up. On the question of the Gang of Four, this was an internal issue in the early 1970s. It came to a head in 74, 75, as the question of succession came on. As it was clear that Mao was expected to die within a year or two, and that succession was very critical, and that Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, and 3 other people seemed to have ambitions that would lead them to try to replace Mao after he died. And as a result of that tension, immediately after Mao died,